horror ship. It was the summer of 1973 when the Mistral, a cargo ship, set sail from Istanbul, Turkey, headed for Odessa, Ukraine. The crew was a mixture of seasoned sailors and newcomers, all eager for the relatively short journey across the Black Sea, but none of them could have predicted the terror that awaited them. On the third night of the voyage, a heavy fog descended upon the ship. The moon disappeared behind a curtain of clouds, and the stars were swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The air was thick with an unnatural chill. The ship's captain, a stern man named Captain Vasily Orlov, instructed the crew to remain vigilant, as visibility was nearly zero. As the hours passed, the fog grew even denser. The engines of the Mistral hummed softly in the distance, their sound strangely muffled by the thick mist. Then, at exactly midnight, the radio crackled to life, breaking the eerie silence. But the voice that came through the static was not one the crew had ever heard before. "Abandon ship," the voice whispered, faint but unmistakable. "The curse is coming." The crew froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The radio went dead immediately after, leaving them in a silence that felt more oppressive than before. Captain Orlov was a man of reason, skeptical of anything supernatural, but even he felt uneasy. He ordered the crew to stay on their posts and to ignore the strange transmission. By the following night, unease gripped the crew like a vice. The thick fog clung to the Mistral, making it feel as though they were trapped inside a world that wasn't entirely real. Some crew members began reporting strange sounds, whispers carried on the cold wind, the distant hum of voices in languages they couldn't understand. One sailor, Yuri, claimed he had seen shadowy figures moving just beyond the deck's edge. They were tall, with elongated limbs and faces obscured by the dense mist. The others dismissed it as a trick of the fog, but Yuri swore the figures were watching the ship. "They're waiting for something," he muttered, his face pale. The real terror began when the ship's compass started spinning wildly, its needle jerking back and forth as though caught in a storm. Navigation became impossible, and the Mistral seemed to drift aimlessly in the fog. Worse, the engines stopped without explanation, leaving the ship dead in the water. No amount of work from the engineers could bring them back to life. Then, during the next day, the crew discovered something chilling. On the walls of the lower deck, strange symbols had appeared overnight, carved deep into the wooden panels. The carvings resembled runes, ancient and sinister, and they seemed to pulsate faintly as if alive. Captain Orlov immediately called for the symbols to be scrubbed away, but no matter how hard the crew tried, the marks remained. The captain's unease deepened when Ivan, the ship's cook, began behaving strangely. He was a jovial man, known for his boisterous laughter, but now he refused to leave the galley. When questioned, he would only mumble about the voices telling him to stay. At night, crew members reported hearing him speak in a language none of them recognized, his voice low and guttural. On the fourth night, things spiraled further into madness. A sailor named Victor discovered a lifeboat had been slashed to ribbons while tethered to the ship. The ropes were shredded, the wood splintered, as if something with claws had torn into it. But what sent chills through Victor's spine was the pool of black water beneath the boat, water that shimmered unnaturally, with faint shapes moving beneath its surface. Several of the crew decided to stay awake together that night, refusing to be alone. But even in groups, the whispers grew louder, filling their ears with promises and threats. One sailor claimed to hear his mother's voice calling to him from the cargo hold, though his mother had been dead for years. Another said he felt invisible hands brushing against his arms and neck. When morning came, exhaustion had taken its toll. Captain Orlov decided it was time to investigate the ship's lower levels thoroughly. Armed with lanterns and a sense of grim determination, he led a small group of men down into the deepest parts of the Mistral. The air grew colder the further they descended, and the stench of rot became overpowering. What they found in the hold chilled them to the core. An ancient chest, bound with rusted chains and engraved with the same symbols carved into the ship's walls, sat in the corner of the hold. It looked out of place, as though it didn't belong on the Mistral. A dark aura seemed to radiate from it, and the men instinctively stepped back. The next evening, the ship's radar picked up another vessel nearby, but it was no ordinary ship. It appeared on the radar, but when they looked out into the fog, there was nothing there. No ship, no lights, just the unending grayness of the sea. Yet the radar continued to show its presence, a phantom ship that would never be seen by human eyes. That night, the crew was struck by a terrifying sight. Through the thick fog, they saw a ship materialize out of nowhere, its sails tattered and its hull darkened with rot. The ship was moving towards them with unnatural speed, its silhouette looming like a giant shadow. Captain Orlov ordered the crew to prepare for a potential collision, but as the two ships grew closer, they noticed something even worse. The crew of the approaching ship was not alive. Their faces were hollow and pale, their eyes black voids staring back with an emptiness that chilled their souls. The figurehead of the ship seemed to smile, its carved face twisted in a grotesque grin. Panic swept through the Mistral as the ghostly ship drew near. The crew could hear the sound of chains dragging on the deck, and whispers filled the air. A cold wind howled through the ship, carrying with it a smell of decay. The figurehead of the approaching ship began to glow faintly, and as it got closer, the air grew unbearably cold. Without warning, the ghost ship vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but an overwhelming sense of dread. The crew was left in stunned silence, not knowing if they had imagined it or if it was real. The end.